Hello, friends. How's everybody? Everybody okay today? Good, good. A couple of things. One, if last week's homework seemed heavy to you or too much, some of you are laughing. Some of you are going, "Oh, it's fine." This week is a little lighter. Let me tell you why. In the last 5 days, we've had 3 ball games, a sports banquet, a stomach virus, a passing out spell that meant we were at the doctor all day. There was like so many other things I was going to tick off for you. And I am not bothered by any of that, but let's just say that things had to come down a notch. I had to be mama a lot this week. Oh, I know what else it was. 4-H projects. Anybody? 4-H projects. And it's both the 4th graders. So, and one of them has to make 2 desserts for the one project. I don't understand that. So anyway, your homework is a little bit lighter, but I pray and trust that God will still use this word to speak to you. Some of you may be relieved to have a lighter week. But for those reasons, I will probably not tarry too long tonight. Now, I'm not rushing you out, okay? But I may leave a little sooner than I usually do just because the 4-H projects are due tomorrow and there's still a Walmart pickup after this. So you know where I'm at in that process, right? There's still glue. There's still going to be some glitter. There's still things that need to happen. Poster board is involved. Yes, there's a lot of things involved. Woo-wee. So, you know, this is what we do though, right? This is what we do. So anyway, I did want to tell you something, and it connects directly to what I shared last week. You all may or may not have noticed this, but last week I could not seem to get the words that were in my head out of my mouth. I just felt like I was tripping over my words. I could never pull the right one out. Well, you know, I was teaching on fear, and I talked expressly about the fact that my calling is one of the things I'm fearful about, that I struggle with. And I got home and Nathan asked how it went, and I said, I just couldn't get the words out. I don't know what was wrong. I'm not saying it ruined it. That's not, the Lord's word is powerful. I know that. But I need you to know that Satan used that to wreak havoc in my heart all weekend long. I did everything I needed to do. I prayed, Lord, it doesn't matter. This is about you. It's not about a performance. I prayed all the things, y'all. I know, I know it's not about me. I know that in my head. But still, please tell me that sometimes you still wrestle, even though you know the thing in your head. I wrestled and wrestled all weekend, had no peace about it, just felt like it just... And so Monday, finally, I was praying about it again. And I said, Lord, I just couldn't get it to come out. And that made me feel like it wasn't communicated well. And I said, I just stammered and stuttered all the way through it. And this is what I heard in my spirit. Moses stuttered too. You tell me the Lord is not good. You tell me he is not deeply personal. Only he would take some night that I had stuttered my way through. And that hasn't come to my mind in the first bit of this preparation for Bible study. So for him to bring it was just so, and I have had nothing but peace since that moment. And so I'm really thankful, and I just wanted to share that with you and know that God does personally and intimately care about us, and he also recognizes our humanity. We forget, don't we? We need constant reminders, and he is sweet to constantly remind. So be encouraged. Tonight we're going to look at a really dramatic part of Moses' story. There's a lot of things that happened in Moses' life that you could consider dramatic. But this one certainly ranks up there to me anyway. And as we look at it, you'll see that it has a lot to do with being able to see that God is working in the everyday lives of humans, their everyday choices. It's called providence. That's the word, the theological word you would use, that God is his hand is the one directing and guiding in our everyday lives. And you're going to see that on full display today. And so I was thinking back, as I always do, okay, when's a time in my life that I could see that what happened was by no means an accident. It was not by chance. It was absolutely God's hand. And I couldn't help but to think about the way in which Jace, my adopted son, came to us. And you have to know, I decided to tell this. I thought of several examples, but I had to stick with this one because his 10th birthday is today. And I could just eat him, slam up. You should have seen him opening his gifts this afternoon. Jace is a child of extremes. And when he is happy, he is extremely happy. And so it was so much fun for us to give to him and watch him enjoy things that he enjoys, you know. But anyway, I was thinking back to that, which, just so you know, has now been 10 years plus a couple of days. Nathan and I had already signed up for foster care classes. We were in the process of getting licensed. And before we even finished the classes, DHR called us and said, we have 2 children that are already, they're really about to be adoptable. They're in a foster care situation now, a foster home, but that foster home is not going to adopt. So we're looking for adoptive parents. You have to technically foster, but you knew for the most part that those children were going to become yours. And so Nathan and I talked about it, and we were all in. We said, yeah, I think this is what we'll do if this is what needs to happen. And so we were trying to set up a time to meet the children, and it was because of different circumstances, it was going to take a while. And finally, a DHR worker called me and said, hey, there's an Easter egg hunt at the East Liberty Baptist Association is sponsoring an Easter egg hunt for foster families. Why don't you come? We wouldn't necessarily introduce you, but you could at least just see them and be around them. And Nathan and I talked about it, and Titus had his very first T-ball game that day. But what we decided was that I would go and just be there for a little while, and Nathan would go on and do, taking pictures beforehand and all of that kind of stuff. And then I'd meet them there at the ball game. So I wasn't going to have long, but I did. And don't you know, I was a nervous wreck driving up there. When you're going to lay eyes on what you think is going to be your new children for the first time, there's a lot of emotion involved there. And I was giddy, and I was excited and nervous. What would they look like, and what would they be like? We knew their names and a few other things, but that was about it. So I got there, and social workers greeted me, and they've always been very warm to us, and it was a good experience working with the social workers you need to know in our county. But I got there, and they said, well, they're running a little bit behind. And I said, oh, I hope they get here because I have to leave in about an hour and a half. I can't stay any longer than that. And they said, oh, I'm sure they'll get here. Well, I kept mingling and meeting people, and they just kept saying, they're trying to get here. They've just gotten held up. And so on and on until, at the last minute, I finally said, y'all, I'm sorry, but I can't miss Titus's first game. I need to be there. Well, there was another couple from our church who were going through the classes at the same time. And the lady, the wife, said, well, I'm going to be here, and I'll try to maybe just snap a picture or something. I'll look for you. And I said, oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. And so I was hurrying to my car because I was already feeling the pressure. I was running late to the baseball game because I'd stayed as long as I could. And about the halfway to the car, I heard one of the social workers call my name, and she said, hold up. Can you just wait a second? So she caught up to me, and she said, Beth, I know that you came to meet these other 2 children, but we had a baby born yesterday, and we need to place it on Monday. It's a little boy, and we really would love for y'all to consider welcoming that child. And I said, well, what about the other 2? And she said, oh, no, this wouldn't change that at all. This is probably very temporary. There's some family in line and on, all the different considerations. And she said, we would just put that other situation on hold for a bit until we find out what to do with this baby more permanently. Those children are in a safe place. You could continue on getting to know them. And so she said, I said, well, okay, let me just make sure with Nathan, but I'm sure the answer is yes. Well, Friends, I got a text a little bit later. I went to the ball game, told Nathan, we're getting a baby on Monday. You ready for that? No, we weren't ready for that. But went and told him, and excitement, with all of that. And then later in the afternoon, I got a text from the sweet other lady who was there, the church member, friend of mine. And she sent me pictures of just the little girl was there, but she sent me pictures. And I thought, I didn't really know what to do with it in the moment, but thought about it. Well, Monday we welcomed that little Jace Lawrence, not Lawrence at the time, but Jace Lawrence in our home, just this big, y'all. He was 5 pounds, tiny but mighty, right? Tiny dynamite, into our home, and the rest is history. Many of you know, you walked that story with us, the years of desperately trying and wanting to adopt him, but all the things that happened in between. But here's the part that was so incredible as I look back on that story, okay? I mean, it wasn't just happenstance that I decided to go to the Easter egg hunt that day. And it wasn't just happenstance that I think that they were probably in a tight and needed to find somebody, and they saw me there, and they decided to ask me about Jace. And friends, it was no happenstance that other church member was there either. Because guess who ended up adopting those other 2 children? She and her husband. And it was all so ordained by God. Every bit of it. You can't look at that story and think of anything other than God's hand was in it. We get to see those precious children sometimes, and there's just such a peace knowing the Lord's hand placed those children where He wanted them to be placed. And I bet as you look back in your life, you can see times that you just know, you might not have at the moment, but you can look back and see how God was just maneuvering, navigating all the different circumstances for the end result that He wanted. And that's exactly what we're going to look at tonight in Exodus 2, 1. Let's see, how far do we go tonight? Yeah, I think 1 through 10. You want to go ahead and turn there. Let me pray, and we will dive in together. Oh, Lord, I'm always so thrilled when I get to look back and think about how you've worked in my life. And it absolutely boggles and confounds my mind that you have done that for every single life in this room. And you're doing it still. Your ability to maneuver and sovereignly ordain all the tiny details of our life make me marvel at who you are. And I pray that tonight, as we look at this story, Lord, that you wrote, that we would be reminded of that truth, that you do sovereignly ordain all things. You make them come to pass. And I pray that that would cause us, Lord, to trust you more and see you as the mighty, caring, loving God that you are. Let us worship you as we see your goodness, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's look at 2. You might remember last week, real quick, let's just make sure you remember. We looked at how the Israelites came to be in Exodus in the first place, right? We talked about the story of Joseph just a little bit. And then we looked at the new king who came to the throne and how he was fearful of the Israelites, the Hebrews. They're called by both names, back and forth a little bit. Fearful of them, and because of his fear, he wanted to control them. And if you're doing the daily study guide, that was the majority of day 5, right? How our fear really can cause us to want to control things. And he absolutely did. He tried to control the situation and control those people and put a lid on them, so to speak. But all through that story, we see that God just continued to increase their numbers, even though that's exactly what Pharaoh was trying to stop. But can we stop the Lord Almighty? As the song said, no, we can't stop. Neither could Pharaoh, most powerful person anywhere around at that time. And so the Israelites continued to increase in number. And we saw that Pharaoh went so far as to try to enlist the help of the Hebrew midwives and have them kill the male babies. We saw that they feared God more than they feared man. which gave them the courage to not follow through. But the very last sentence that we read, let me just read it for you again in verse 22 of chapter 1, and then we'll spring on in to chapter 2, 1 through 4. It says this: Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So Pharaoh takes it up a notch, right? Not just the midwives trying to kill the baby boys, but he tells all his people, this is a mandate, all male Hebrew babies shall be thrown into the Nile. So this is where we pick up in our story today. Verse 1, chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. Now let's stop right there. I know we might go back and forth because this story is rich. A man from the house of Levi. Well, what in the world does that mean? Who is he of the lineage of? Levi, right? If you might remember Israel or Jacob, his name was Jacob. God changed it to Israel. Jacob had all the sons. You remember making, if you did your study guide, you made like a little family tree. Levi is one of those sons. And so there's a man from the house of Levi, and we're going to learn that his name is Amram. Probably not pronounced right. Amram. We don't find that out until chapter 6. The man's name is Amram, and the wife's name is Jochebed. Jachobed. So right when we start off, we don't even learn these people's names, but we learn something important about them. They're Hebrews of the tribe or the family of Levi. Now, if you know anything about Exodus, and I bet a bunch of you do, but you may just need to remember that who are the Levites? Later, farther into this story, the priests. They're the ones that God says, I want the men who are Levites to be the priests of this worship system that I'm setting up, so that the priests go before God on behalf of the people. They're also spiritual leaders for Israel, okay? So right here, even before his birth, God is ordaining that Moses, his chosen servant, is going to be born in a family that he's going to line up, right, for what comes later. So he's born in the right family, friends. God is doing all the things, lining everything up from the very beginning so that Moses is in the right tribe for his future calling, right? All right, so these two, Jochebed and Amram, they get married. Let's see what happens in verse 2. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. Okay, so Jochebed and Amram, they get married and they have a son, which is just further evidence that God is continuing to do what? Make the Israelites, the Hebrews, a mighty nation. He's continuing to expand. He's continuing to bless marriages and send babies. But bearing a child during this time is both what? A blessing and a curse, right? Now, can you imagine? I love to try to get into the skin of the characters in these stories. And if I was thinking about my first pregnancy and imagining Jochebed, what do you think those 9 months were like for her? Do you think that they hoped for a girl? Can you imagine the fear that they would have had, wondering, is this baby going to be a boy? I don't know. And I know this. Moses uses the phrase, she conceived and gave birth to 15 times. That phrase that we see here, she conceived and gave birth to, he uses it 15 times when he's writing Genesis. And every time he uses that phrase, it's about a birth that is particularly significant to the story. And he uses that phrase right here of his birth story. Remember, Moses is writing this, first biographer. He uses this for the 16th time to describe his own birth. And then he doesn't use it again for the rest of the Pentateuch. Isn't that interesting? So we find out that she conceives, she has a son. And what does she say about him when she looks at that baby boy? He's beautiful. He was a fine child, some translations say. Now, was he especially beautiful in such a way that he should be spared and all the other bear male babies should be killed? No, no. The word used, beautiful or fine, is the same word used in the creation account of good. It's the word tob in Hebrew, T-O-B, means good. And so when God was saying he made the light and it was good, and he made the animals and it was good, and he made male and female and it was very good, the same word right here. She looks at her child and she declares, as God declared, this child is good. This is of God. This is a valuable baby. Right? And Hebrews tells us, you can find some narration, a little bit of this story in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews tells us that it was by faith that they hid Moses. Okay? In other words, their faith, the faith of Amram and Jochebed, absolutely played into the fact that they wanted to hide this child. They knew by faith that this was God's creation, that which should be protected and loved, and was not meant to be so brutally destroyed. So they hid that baby for 3 months. Right? Let's see what happens next. But before we move on, though, can you imagine those 3 months? Every time soldiers came around, the Egyptian soldiers came around, what that was like for them, just living on eggshells. Okay, let's see what happens in verse 3. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. So Jochebed hides him as long as she possibly could, but eventually a healthy baby can't be hidden, can they? They get the lungs really develop and they can make quite a racket, right? And they begin to be not so much mobile at 3 months, but it's pretty hard to hide a baby as they grow. So she did what she knew to do. She devised a plan, and it included getting a basket or making it she got a basket of papyrus, it says, and she lined it with bitumen and pitch, which essentially would have helped it be waterproof and also probably help protect the baby from the heat. Egypt, hot, right? The sun blaring down. And so she puts Moses in this basket made of bulrushes, and she puts him where? In the river, right? Now, where were the babies supposed to be thrown? In the river. Now, she put him in the river, but did she drown him in the river? Absolutely not. She put him in that basket, and if you can imagine the edge of the river with all the reeds growing up, right, where the water is shallow and the flow isn't just washing things away. I think sometimes we tell the story as if she went out to the river and she put him out there and he just floated away. From what the description is, that was not her intention. When she put him near the reeds, right, so he wouldn't go downstream. It seems like she was wanting to keep him toward the shore. And so you have to wonder, maybe part of the plan was, I'll put him there. The color of the papyrus that makes the basket would have blended in with the reeds, right? And so maybe, I don't know, y'all, this is human guessing, but just so you know, some of the commentaries guessed this as well. So it's not a bad guess. The guess is that maybe her plan was to go put him there and then go back home, especially if they heard that the soldiers or Egyptians were around. But when they cleared, maybe she's going to go back, care for the baby, maybe bring him home while she could or nurse him. It really seems as if her plan might have been to hide him there and continue to somehow be able to care for him until the Lord revealed a new plan. And so she puts him there, and who stands at the distance to see what's going to happen? His sister, which we find out later, her name is Miriam. There's also a brother named Aaron, but we'll get to him later. But it's Miriam who's there with her mother. Imagine that as an older sister, right? Watching your mom deal with all that she's dealing with, the fear of this baby. I really can't. Moms and daughters have a special connection often. And almost feeling some of the same things her mother might have felt over this baby, but she stays there to see what will happen. Now, we know that she is old enough to be responsible enough to stay there and stay out of the river, right? But she's clearly not so old that she would be expected to work in the field or the house. So she's probably 9 to 12 is the best guess that we have. We don't know for sure. Maybe there is somebody that knows for sure, but I don't remember finding it. Either way, she's there, and it seems as if this is a family affair trying to protect Moses. It's not just Jochebed. It's a family affair of seeing and knowing by faith that this baby is created in God's image and has value. So let's see what happens next. Miriam's there by the water watching the basket. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the river while her young women walked beside the river. Now stop right there. Most of us have read this story. We've heard it since we were teeny tiny babies, and so we just move on. But it's so important to slow down and just think about this for a minute. Pretend you're Miriam, and you're standing there watching over the baby brother in the Nile, literally, reeds in a basket. And all of a sudden, you see Pharaoh's daughter walking down and then getting in the river near the basket. What is her inner response? Somebody. Freak out. Yeah. Yeah. She is probably not looking at this going, well, this might end well, right? Who is Pharaoh's daughter? Who is her dad? He's the one in charge of trying to destroy all these babies. She has been brought up in a household and under an entire regime that was out to do nothing but destroy these people. She's been indoctrinated to hate, to loathe, to think of as less than human the Jews. And that is who just so happens to come walking down the particular part of the river while Miriam is standing watching over her baby brother. So don't you know her heart was beating out of her chest thinking, please don't notice the basket. Please don't notice the basket. Please don't notice the basket. Verse 5b, I'm sorry. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Okay. No, it got me thinking as I was reading over this, how we interpret what we see unfolding in front of us, right? I can't imagine a scenario in which Miriam wasn't afraid, but some of us tend to either look at things and think, this is going to be a catastrophe, this is going to be awful. And some of us tend to think through, that could be okay, everything might be all right. And I'm sorry, I had to bring this story up because I was thinking of Nathan and I. And the first couple of days that we lived in the house we live now, when we moved to Valley, we had moved from Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Now, there were lovely people in New Mexico. I'm dear friends with many of them to this day. But for the Alabama girl that loved green and azaleas and flowers and all of that, it felt like a drought out there, right? There just wasn't a lot of green rolling hills, and I missed it terribly. And the flowering trees and the flowering bushes and the flowering everything here. Well, when I got back here, I was just delighted to see all the green. I couldn't stop staring out the window. And Nathan came up beside me on that front porch right at the doorway, and he said, what are you looking at? I said, I'm looking at that dogwood tree. Isn't it lovely? And he said, those things die young. And I thought, why would you say that to me right now? How do you know when it's going to die? You don't know, you don't know how old it is, even if they don't live long. But we have laughed about that moment so many times because that is so, God bless him, Nathan. Sometimes he'll look at a situation and he's just sure it's going south, right? That tree's going to die. You don't get attached to the tree, Beth. The tree's going to die. So every single spring, I didn't even know this until that was in September. Come that spring, it was still living, and it bloomed, would you believe, pink. Not a white dogwood, a pink one. I've never seen another one. I'm sure there are more out there. But every single spring, I get to take the opportunity to say, Nate, look at there, that tree's defying you every year. It's still living, it's still cranking. You know, I just have prayed the Lord, let that tree live exceptionally long, you know. But it's so human nature oftentimes to look at something and think, this is going to be horrible. And of all things that Miriam didn't want to happen, she didn't want Pharaoh's daughter to see the basket. And she certainly didn't want Pharaoh's daughter to see the basket and get curious. And she absolutely didn't want Pharaoh's daughter to say to her servants, hey, could you bring me that basket? I want to see what's in it. Right? Can you imagine a million other scenarios that could have happened that day? Pharaoh's daughter could have went somewhere else, to other part of the Nile. She could have seen the basket and ignored it, right? But that is not what happened. Of all things, Pharaoh's daughter sees the basket and she calls for her servant to retrieve it to her. And against all odds, everything that we would think would happen based on what we know of her father, when she opens that basket and sees that baby who's crying, what fills her? Compassion. The exact opposite of what she has been born and raised to think of that child. And you can be sure that that's the last thing that Miriam would have thought she would see on the face of Pharaoh's daughter, is compassion. You know, it makes me think of when we were first deciding to do foster care, and even before that, we had wanted to adopt. And sometimes we would tell people that, you know, this was a part of what we were doing now, is pursuing these things. And I cannot tell you how many times that news was met with a story about a foster child doing something horrible to the foster family. And I thought, first of all, again, like Nathan, why would you say that to us right now? You know, why would you? That's so, it's hard to hear, and it's discouraging and disturbing and all the things. But it felt like there was clearly a mentality among some that thought that all of these children are just horrible humans, and they're going to do nothing but bad to your family. And here's the thing, friends, before I had a Jace Lawrence brought to my actual house, do you know, I didn't know one foster child personally. I had never seen a foster child. I had never interacted with one. But when they brought that baby into my home and I saw how vulnerable and sweet and human and needy he was, this was no monster. This was a child made in the image of God. And I can't help but to think that God did something in Pharaoh's daughter's heart. I really wish we had her name, because it's a mouthful to say Pharaoh's daughter every time. I'm just telling y'all. But that's all she's called, as if we're supposed to remember constantly what her identity is and how unlikely it is that the story would end up the way it did. But this is how it went. She saw, she opened, and she was filled with pity. And she realized that what she was looking at, the identity of that child, was one of the Hebrews. Now, let's see what happens next. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Let's stop right there. Wow, quick thinking, Miriam, right? I mean, the Lord also planted that in her little mind to see the compassion, right? And to take advantage right that moment. Here, you feel compassion? Hey, I know somebody that can help you right now with this baby. This baby's hungry, right? And we don't know if Pharaoh's daughter had other children, anything about her, but we knew that she couldn't meet Moses' need in that moment. She couldn't feed him. And so Miriam says, I know somebody. I can bring you a nurse. Let me do that for you. And I just can't help but to wonder. There's a couple of things that I really wonder. And I wonder if Pharaoh's daughter heard Miriam say that and then wondered to herself, well, why is this little girl here? What's her part in this story? Did she suspect anything? Did she suspect it was family? I don't know. We don't know. But we do know that the Lord planted that thought in Miriam's mind. And she said, do you want me to go call the nurse from the Hebrew women for you? Verse 8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. In a split second, y'all, Pharaoh's daughter makes a decision about one child that will affect millions of lives. Because up until that moment, even though she's filled with compassion, we don't really know that, except that Moses is telling us afterwards, right? In that split second, she went from on her dad's team, essentially, to not on her dad's team. She took the side of the Hebrews. She, how did I say it earlier? I was thinking, I don't know, it doesn't matter. She denies her people and defies what her father says, and just with one word says, go. And it's like the lot is cast. She's going to help instead of harm. She doesn't just have compassion and pity on this child and then fling him into the river. She has compassion and pity on this child, and then she does what's in her power to do something about it, to help. And all of a sudden, in that one word, friends, this whole story turns on its head, doesn't it? Everything that we're watching as young Miriam, that looks like it's headed toward a train wreck, God turns upside down. And he's using a very unexpected woman to change the narrative of the whole story from a human perspective. Of course, he's written every word beforehand. All right, so they go and call the child's mother. Imagine sweet little Miriam's legs trying to get to her mama fast enough. And how in the world do you sputter all that out to your mother and just essentially say, okay, we just got to go. We just got to go. You know, I envision them running as hard as they can up to that river. And let's get to 9. And they finally arrive in front of Pharaoh's daughter, and this is what happens. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child, Jochebed took her child, and nursed him. Okay, we need to be Jochebed for just a minute. We've got to switch from Miriam to Jochebed. Imagine getting there and seeing your baby in the arms of Pharaoh's daughter, who had so much power, seemingly, over his life. And imagine the relief when she says, I want you to take care of this baby for me on my behalf and nurse him, and I'll pay you for it. Everything in their life just changed, didn't it? All the fear, all the worry, all the uncertainty, now they're under the protection of Pharaoh's daughter. And they're provided for. Don't miss that part. I mean, we love to make jokes that she was paid to take care of her own child, but I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say that was minuscule. I don't know that that mattered in the moment, but it is an interesting example of how Pharaoh's daughter didn't just say, take this child away and nurse it and bring it back to me. We see even a little bit more compassion, don't we? A little more concern, a little more care. I'm going to make sure you and he are provided for. I will pay you to do this. You take care of this child. And I do wonder, I told you, I wonder if Pharaoh's daughter suspected about who Miriam was. When those two women were eye to eye by the river that day, did Pharaoh's daughter have the least inkling that this woman was this child's mother? I think she had to at least suspect it. I don't know. Oh, I can't wait to find out one day. God had used this point all kinds of women to shelter and protect Moses. You think about that just a minute. Midwives, right? A biological mother, his biological mother who loved him and is trying to do everything she could do to protect him, everything within her power to protect him. A sister, and now the daughter of Pharaoh himself. God can do good through the most unlikely people in the most unbelievable scenarios. I say it all the time. He writes the best stories. We couldn't have dreamed this up. We couldn't have made this story up. You know, I think, I know I'm talking about Jace a lot, and I have to bring Rachel into the mix a little bit. But we've had people say some very sweet things they about our family and them and how well they're doing. And I say all the time, y'all, it really did. It takes the whole tribe for this to happen. It takes the whole village. And I think back to nursery workers who were exceptionally patient with those two children, one that could escape anytime he wanted to out of that nursery. I don't even know how many times our poor security team had to get off doing actual security and go find Jace because he had escaped the nursery again. And sweet little Rachel, when she came and was very closed off, it was hard to communicate with her, but there was so much patience by our church family for both of those children. In fact, Nathan and I joked many times and would say, you know, when people join the church, we need to say that part of the church covenant is that they have to help us raise all these children that the Lord has given us. But that's absolutely been the mentality, and not just for my family. Many, many people have loved all of my children and have poured into them, from nursery workers to Sunday school teachers to Christian teachers in the public schools, y'all. Speech therapists there, special ed people there. All of my children have benefited from God, not just two parents who loved them, but from numerous men and women who God placed to enrich them and mold them. And we can see it in this story, can't we? The midwives, the bio mom, and the sister, now Pharaoh's daughter. All of these people play a part in how God is protecting and providing for Moses. And it's true of us as well. Can you just imagine the mind of God and how big it must be to have this kind of sovereignty over every single life? And for him, down to these tiny details, for him to write this sort of story. That is exceptional providence. Because he's an exceptional, holy, beyond God. I try to also imagine what it was like for Jochebed when she got home with a baby and Amram got home. How do you tell this story? You know, with great delight, with incredible relief, with an overwhelming joy. And don't you know that she told that story to Moses? Likely, Moses stayed most of the time with her until he was 3 or 4. And that's foundational years. You probably know that. A lot, experts always say those years are so vital and foundational. And don't you know, that mama poured as much of the faith that she had in her God into that baby boy who she had seen God oversee all the details of his life. And here he is retelling it, friends. Here he is retelling the story of how God spared him, how he used these women, right? He used their faith, he used their compassion. And then verse 10. When the child grew older, notice that he's referred to as only the child until now. When the child grew older, she, being Jochebed, brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, I drew him out of the water. I can't imagine what it was like for Jochebed to hand Moses over. But strangely, unbelievably, against all odds, he was safe in the very courts of the evil king who'd been trying to kill him. So I'm sure that there was an enormous grief there. But also, how could you deny God's will in this? That this was his protection, that this was his plan. Didn't make it necessarily any easier. I think it's very interesting that the adoptive mother, Pharaoh's daughter, who's never named, names Moses. And she named him what she named him because she said, I drew him out of the water. The water that was supposed to be his destruction, right, was not his destruction. The word for the basket that Moses used earlier when he describes the basket, it's the word Tebah, T-E-B-A-H. It's only used one other time in all of Scripture, and it's when Moses is describing the ark in Genesis 6 through 8. Both men, same name for these vessels that carry them safely through water that other people are destroyed by. The connections back to Genesis are so many here. But what matters is that God's chosen servant was safe, not because of any necessarily human efforts, even though they all played a part. He was safe because he was God's chosen servant. And no power on earth could roll that back, could change that. One of the things I've been thinking as I read through this and studied for it is that what we see sometimes as a sure disaster or a setback or something that we would not have chosen, something that seems like this is bad, that very thing may be what God uses you to spare you or set you on a whole nother trajectory that you can't imagine. Over and over in Scripture, he shows that he can flip what seems to be an inevitable problem right on its head. He's the God of dramatic reversals. He's the God of the unexpected. Now, I have to tell you, if you are in Christ, then you're living proof of this. Because with all of the same detail and care and all the nuances of Moses' birth story, that same level of care and involvement was part of your salvation story. God positioned people. God made things happen at just the right time because he had already chosen you. You were a marked woman. We can't forget that. Satan had us hook, line, and sinker, didn't he? Or so he thought. Like Pharaoh's daughter looked on Moses with pity, Jesus looked on us in pity and drew us out of the deep waters that sin that Satan wanted to drown us in. Jesus looked on us with pity and did something about our predicament at great cost to himself. He drew you out. He set your feet upon the rock. He chose you and he saved you. He protected you then, and he will protect you now. He's not going to walk away from Moses, is he? He's not going to walk away from us. He doesn't put all that love and care and intimate involvement into saving us only just to say, okay, you're on your own. Good luck to you. Best wishes. No, he's going to continue to care for us. He's called and equipped you for good works that he planned in advance for you to do. You're his chosen servant. Moses' life was always in God's hand. Every moment. So is yours. So is mine. Your life is not in the hand of chance. It's in the hands of God. Your life is not in the hand of the person who's against you. Your life is not in the hands of everything that seems to be just carrying you along willy-nilly. Your life is not in the hands of cancer or diabetes or bankruptcy or divorce or your husband or your parents or your children or your bank account. God is the unseen force shaping every single thing that is happening in your life. And even the things that you think are unfolding not the way you would want them to unfold, God is going, everything's going as planned. Even the things that don't seem like it. It's all going according to plan. And therefore, we can lay our heads down at night in true rest, y'all. Knowing we are in His hands. Let's pray. Oh Lord, I love thinking about it. I love talking about it. That we really truly are in your hands. There's nothing going on that is beyond you. It's all ordered and ordained and navigated and controlled by you. God, give us eyes of faith as we look at our lives. Help us to see you and your hand in it. And when we can't see your hand, help us to trust your heart. Oh Lord, let us be a people, let us be a women who truly love and trust you in all things. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, you've got your discussion questions. I love hearing the murmur. I can't hear specific words, and I don't listen in. I give y'all space to talk. I pray that it'll be a good night discussion.